Lola, for the warm welcome. You just know how to stroke a girl's ego. Could do with that. And welcome, Jordan and Erhu. How are you? Good. So I'm not going to make any introductions so that we can have enough time to talk about the work and also to engage with the audience. So I think let's just go into it. We've discussed the parts that you're going to read as a way for us to open our conversation. So, yeah, I've picked one for you. Yeah, but I'll start. So, do you want to read what I want, or you want to read what you want?
What you want.
Good. So, for you, Erhu, I'd like you to read from page 130. Are you serious? So yes, please read 130 to 132.
Okay.
Yes.
She was an expert at making iruboto, my favorite soup. She made it in the courtyard on rainy days. I would watch her make it in an ewere, adding pepper, roasted ere, urere, and finally a roasted blackfish on top. I used to long for rain just to eat the soup. Inemesi dropped a few more silver shells on the table, in case you want to eat some more. Tamuno cried out in delight and snatched up the coins, rushing to the bar to order more food. I drank my water, smiling softly. Moyo ate slowly and silently. He looked worried. His expression mirrored what I felt. I had never been so scared my entire life. Dreaming about something was quite different from actually doing it. That night, I was so anxious I could not sleep. The next day, we would leave Moyo and Inemesit and venture into the Orerope Sands, the long stretch of desert leading through the Lost Lands. I stared at the roof all night until morning came. The butcher who delivered meat to the public house was a friend of Moyo's. He gave us directions that would take us near the border. The five of us passed through a sea of moonflowers along the way. Their silver petals almost glowed in the morning sun. Their crisp, clean scent filled my nostrils and eased the tightness in my chest. For a moment, in that abundance of flowers, I almost forgot about my fears. We crossed to the other side of the flower field, past the stream and over a small hill, and came upon the Orerope Sands. It was an endless sea of reddish-brown dunes as far as my eyes could see. It was beautiful in its severity, in its devastation. The Lost Lands, Atai announced, straightening up. He held a hand above his brow and stared into the desert, as if trying to find something out there in the empty space. We have to go through this, Tamuno grumbled. Yes, I told him, looking at the map. Go home now if you want. This time I said those words to myself too. This is where we part ways, Moyo said. Inemesit and Atai stepped away from us. The oracle spoke quietly to her son, who nodded at her every word. Tamuno shuffled away, giving us all the privacy for our goodbyes. I turned to Moyo, his face etched in sadness and something eerily similar to love. How can I ever repay you, Moyo? I asked, my voice cracking. He smiled gently. You already have. He took my hands. In my clan, there is a mighty river called Iso Aon Antonia. Its name translates to the smoke that thunders. It moves rapidly through bends and cliffs, breaking past gigantic boulders. The river makes a thunderous roaring sound as it flows, sending mist into the air around. Despite those obstacles, despite those boulders, the water moves fast and strong. It cannot be held back. It cannot be less than it is. His eyes welled, and I felt my heart ache. That is how you are, Nabari, like the unstoppable waters. Ufi and I never had a chance to have children. We would have been lucky to have had a daughter like you. I'm so very proud of you. I blinked back tears and threw my arms around him. He hugged me fiercely. Go well, Nabari, he said. I know that I'll write to you. Please take care of Tega. I promise. Inemesit and Atai stepped toward us, and Tamuno hurried closer. Your journey may be rough, said the oracle, but everything will come full circle soon enough. Obasi does not make mistakes. He picks the person best suited for the time and the place. She gave me a reassuring smile and glanced at Atai. Obasi will protect you all, she said. I know, Atai replied. Be safe and eat your vegetables when you can. Tamuno howled a laugh as Atai blushed. I smiled. It's time, we all gently. The midday heat has passed. I looked out at the sands before us and took a deep breath. I could go back home, I thought. I could forget about my desire to be free, the drumming in my gut, the pain of the boy in my dreams. But his fear was bone deep. And as much as I was afraid of the unknown, it was nothing compared to his fear, to my fears of what awaited me if I turned back. I stepped forward, Atai followed, Tamuno behind him, and our journey began.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll get to why I chose that part. Jordan, over to you to do your opening reading before we can get into the work. All right.
I just want to say I'm a big fan of The Smoke That Thunders, but I experienced it through the audiobook. So if you can get your hands on this, awesome. But the person who read The Smoke That Thunders audiobook, it's someone named Robin Miles, who is one of the most celebrated audiobook readers, in the world. She's amazing. So any form of this book you can get, but especially the audiobook, it's very good.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jordan Ifueko. I'm more known for the Raybearer series, which was a New York Times bestseller in 2020. It's in development at Netflix, but that could mean a number of things. It's been in development for years. The Maid and the Crocodile is a standalone set in the same world of Raybearer. So Raybearer is about empresses, princesses, and princes, dark and beautiful. But I wanted to explore the same world from the bottom. I wanted to explore the exact same world where I had told stories about royalty from the perspective of a disabled teen house girl, a maid. So here's the first excerpt from The Maid and the Crocodile from the world of Raybearer. You are powerful and important, and I am only me. But I am told you are a good listener, and if I do not look into your eyes, I am a little less afraid. So I will try to tell my story without lies. When a god stalked me on my 17th birthday, the day I aged out of the orphan house, I did not see him, not at first. No one does, as immortals prefer to send signs ahead of themselves. A flock of herons making rude symbols in the sky, for example, or a pair of oxen that eerily resemble your town butcher and his wife. In my case, it was a perfectly ordinary gecko, bright green, flecked with orange and ochre. It skittered across the outer courtyard wall of the Anumeji orphan house, making dust patterns on the whitewashed brick as Mama Poor Child and my foster siblings bid me farewell. I was kind to you, Mama Poor Child cooed in her sing-song way, unaware of the agitated gecko inches above her head. I'm going to skip to another. Where is it? Sorry. I was not surprised to be stalked by a deity. Perhaps for important people like yourself, encounters with the divine are special. High gods, like Am the storyteller and the goddess of earth, tend to visit high mortals, creatures as rare and perfect as themselves. But low beings always outnumber the high, even among deities. Imps and wisps, demigods and bickering sprites. These are the workers of everyday miracles, who cause fruit to sprout from seeds and teach bees how to swarm and guide unborn babies to form fingers and toes. These gods do not seek perfection, they seek entertainment. These gods, you see, are bored. In Cookfire tales, deities are drawn to unusual beauty. But in true life, they are lured by unusual, well, anything. And that is where my story comes in. We small Sades, with our speckled skin and our dead parents and our misshapen feet, have been fending off spirits since the day we were born. Do not say them, please, those words. I see them now, eager to be spat out, hopping across your tongue like cayenne pepper. You should not say such things about your skin. You are looking so nice, small Sade. Really, I did not even notice. But you did notice, and that is fine. I like my face, and it has always been this way. Light spots on dark, like clouds drifting over a moonless pond. I am this way all over, in fact. The high-rise physician called it vitiligo. It is blander than the phrase I hear most, spirit touched. And that's all.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for the incredible readings. So I want us to get into the work. I think first let's talk about, so speculative fiction is a very generic word. And I know that for some authors, they've got quite specific, ways that they use to describe their work. Are you speculative? Are these books speculative fiction, or you've got exact descriptions, for the work? We can start with you, Jordan.
Okay. I love the phrase speculative fiction to describe sci-fi and fantasy because, one of the appeals of Afrofuturism, even though that's not what I write, a lot of people call it Afrofuturism, it's Afrofantasy, and really it's global fantasy. As I'm a diasporic person, it covers so many different cultures. But I love the idea of speculating. The reason why, in my opinion, Western-centric fantasy has such a chokehold on those industries is because they can imagine themselves in so many different kinds of societies, so many different kinds of innovations and futures, but they can't imagine Black and brown people anywhere else. So when I was a little girl, if I wanted to read a book with a Black girl on the cover, as a Nigerian American girl, it had to be about a slave. I did love Addie from American Girl. She was great, but that was my option, right? It was about a slave or it was about a girl in the projects, dealing with gangs, and teen pregnancy. That's what Black girls on the cover were. And if I wanted to read a story about an adventure and magic and empires rising and falling, I had to read Lord of the Rings. I had to read Chronicles of Narnia. So fantasy was a genre that never loved me back. And eventually, I actually started writing the Raybearer series when I was 13 because I liked the idea of a world where our stories were not about our struggle with colonialism. I like that we have so many stories like that, but when children and teenagers and young adults only read the same kind of story about themselves, they start to, it's almost as though struggle has to be a part of who you are. And those stories are valuable because they reflect the world we live in, but I wanted to write about an empire where, the word blue blood in the empire of the Raybearer books means someone with skin so black, it's almost blue. Because the center of power is directly based on the Oyo Empire of Nigeria. The way I've pitched Raybearer to Netflix is, okay, imagine everything the Roman Empire did, all of the different cultures they spanned, because Rome was in Egypt, it was in Middle East, it was in Western Europe, but imagine the Yoruba did that. And so you'd have this central capital where you'd see people from all over the world. Raybearer, it has a main council of teenagers who are being groomed to rule this empire. And the prince, Dio, and the main character, Tarisai, you have all these different parts of Africa, but you also have Ailing from a Han Chinese empire, or Coded, you have Korean characters. I loved that idea of a centralized, and it questions the idea of empire, but that's what speculative fiction means to me. It's I can't imagine people with my background and people who look like me doing anything rather than just this one thing that this stream of history has forced us into.
Thank you, Jordan. So, Erhu, how do you describe your work? Is it speculative fiction enough to describe your work, or you've got more?
For this book, especially, I wouldn't say it's speculative fiction. It's actually fantasy. And I want to call it fantasy because after writing it, I said I won't write on that fantasy again because it was very stressful. So I have to call it what it is. It's a fantasy novel, young adult fantasy novel set in Nigeria, southern Nigeria, with inspiration from the Urhobo tribe. So that's what it is. Thank you.
Okay, so I think then the next question is just let's talk about the research that went into the work. Was there any research, or all of it was fantasy, speculative? I know that in the blurb you say, Erhu, you want, for you it's just more than writing. You wanted to know more about your people, the expansiveness of them. So what type of research did you have to do, and did you incorporate any of your findings into the work?
Yes, I did. I asked a lot of questions. I have a friend, Mr. Xavier Igoroje. I don't know if you know him. He really helped me. His mother, actually. I would have asked my mom, but she's late. She's the only one who I have a rapport with, not my dad. So I asked him a lot of questions. He relayed it to his mom, and she got back to me, which I imputed in the story. I also read a lot of research papers. That's something that, I feel like a lot of writers don't actually look into. Research papers about the Urhobo tribe, about culture, mythology, and all that. You can find them on Google, on Glosplay. You see people from different universities, colleges, and stuff wanting to know more about the Urhobo tribe. So there was a lot of information there, and I took from it and ran with it. Yeah.
So how long was your research process before you then got into pouring yourself into?
I kept researching until publication, until close to publication, because editing, when I first started writing, it was, when the idea first came to me was when I was in university. I was studying medical biochemistry. I wanted to become a doctor. You know how it is in Nigeria now, whether a doctor, lawyer, or and I knew that I don't want to be a doctor. No way. So, as with most creatives, that feeling of, I don't want to do this, and my dad wanted me to do that, I needed to find a way to express myself. So that's why this story came into being. So I started writing it, first draft, started sending it out for submissions to agents, lots of rejections, like a lot. And then I found I called literary Sarah Dedina. She really liked the story. From there, I kept researching more and more. But then, one thing that I don't think a lot of people knew was it wasn't actually based on Urhobo culture when I first wrote it. It was just like a general fantasy, Africa, because a lot of people like Moyo, he's not an Urhobo name. He's not part of it. So I had to change a lot of things after I got the book deal with Norton. I was like, when I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is not, because my editor kept asking me questions that I don't really know the answer to this. So, yeah. So I was like, I needed to focus on what I know, where I'm from. So that's what made me start researching, asking questions, and I love the way where I went with it. First of all, I changed the main character's name from another name to Nabari. Nabari means someone born with a great destiny. So that I was like, oh yeah, that's it. I have to focus on Urhobo and Southern Nigerian mythology. Yeah, so I researched for a very long time till past pages. If you are a writer, you know what that is. Till past pages. So let me just sum it up. For 4 years, I was researching. Yeah, that's. Yeah.
Quite a long time. Yeah.
A long time, yeah.
I'm not a writer, so I don't. So you, Jordan, you are Nigerian American, but your book is also set in the continent type. So what type of research did you have to embark on?
So the world of Raybear is set in an alternate, it's called like a second world, where it's not this one, but you can see all of the parallels, right? So it's technically not Nigeria and Ghana and Korea and all of these places that are obvious cultural references. but I wanted to. When I first started writing Raybearer, everything was so vague culturally. I was a child, I was a teenager, and I didn't feel I had permission to write a high fantasy, sweeping eras and continents about someone who looked like me, because I'd never seen one. But I knew I didn't want to write a white fantasy, so it was vague. It was a hot mess. The teen version of this book, everyone had these kind of Afro-Latin-y names and had these kind of loose, shapeless robes that you couldn't pin down to any culture. And it was when I studied English in college, studied literature, studied writing, studied theater, that I was like, no, if you don't make cultures specific in your writing, and you're writing in the West, they just automatically fill in white. And so I went the other extreme, if I'm honest with you. I ended up doing research on 13 culturally distinct cultures that are all in this empire. And it was a lot of work. I mean, I got what I could from my parents in terms of the storytelling traditions, but, a lot of it was literally JSTOR, an academic research. And sometimes the research you put into this comes out in only 2 sentences. In the sequel to Raybearer, there's a scene where a prince is pretending to be vapid and shallow, and all he cares about is sports. But he's from a specific realm in this empire that's loosely based on East Africa, regions of East Africa. And I had to say, okay, what sports were played pre-colonial, this part of Kenya that I could make a reference to that this guy would play. And that's literally hours and hours of research for 2 sentences in a book that's not even really about Kenya. But it's when you want a culture to be authentic and you're committed to it, that's the kind of thing you do. Yeah.
Okay, so lots of work. I think let's I want us to now just focus on your characterization. So coincidentally, both of your books, center young women who are fearless, who are ambitious, who are very smart, despite the circumstances that they find themselves in. And I want to know if this protagonist, was it intentional, or it just came and was flowing with your stories, or it was very intentional?
Yeah, for me it was very intentional. She had to be someone that was brave, that would be brave, that would be fearless, especially when it came to relation with her sister, because she has a younger sister.
Yes.
Yeah, who is
happy to get married and
her
kids.
own version of freedom is quite different from hers. So she has to, she had to come from a very strong place, a very fearless place. Yeah. So yeah, it was intentional. She had to be that way. Yeah.
And you, Jordan, was
Yes.
was our Maid intentional, small shedding?
The reason why I have to hold up both of these books is that the protagonist of Maid is not a leader. And I made her that way in contrast to the protagonist of Raybearer, who is I am going to rule the world with justice. I'm going to fight all of these structural powers. And that was so cool to write, but it's also pretty typical of YA fiction, right? You have a young woman who is going to take on all the challenges of the world, who's going to lead a revolution. And I love that narrative, but I wanted to challenge myself to have a heroine who, since she has been beaten down by these same structural systems so many times, she's extremely pragmatic about her chances, to the point where she submits before she even has to. I wanted to talk about a girl who has basically self-indoctrinated herself to protect herself, and the journey and how hard it is to get out of that. Every time the protagonist, I read the first line of this book, "You are powerful and important and I am only me." That's the first line of The Maid and the Crocodile. And the journey she takes from the beginning to the end is to flip that. But I wanted her to start there, because that's not like a journey I see often in YA fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I think the way you molded her, you will not have thought that she will end up where she ended. So that was quite impressive. So both of your books for young adults, which is quite a range in terms of age, if you take it that way. But I wanted to know that beyond escapism, we see a lot of rebellion, but we also see how your characters charter their own path in different ways. They are very resolute to that as well. So I want to know, and this sort of, can also be a description of a young adolescent or a teenager or somebody just coming out of teenagehood. So I want to know, how much did you have to really immerse yourself in the life of a typical young adult for you to bring forth your characters in the way that will also be very relatable to them?
For my character, I don't want to get into it too much, but it came from a place of experience, actually. You grow up in an environment where you see some things, and then at a very young age, you are like, because I mentioned this in my book, Nabari doesn't want to end up like her mom. She has some strong feelings right there. She doesn't want to end up like her. She had like nightmares about it, like ending up like her mom. So yeah, that comes from a little bit of experience on my part, which I don't want to get into.
You want them to read the book so they know more about Nabori. Jordan, how much did you have to immerse yourself into a typical or average mind of young adults to bring your characters to life?
I mean, I guess part of the premise of what I write for teenagers and young adults is that, I know this might seem like a trite thing to say. I don't know that there is an average teenager, if that makes sense. I think teenagers have such rich inner lives, and that's why I actually love young adult fiction. A lot of it is the coming of age narrative, right? You're watching someone become who they are, and I think that's why there's so much age range in YA fiction. My oldest readers are like very mature adults, and my youngest readers are 11. Because we all relate to that identity-making journey of coming of age of young adults. And so I really like that space. I love the joy that teenagers have for things. I feel like there's this age where you haven't yet learned that it's not cool to love things. And when you haven't learned that yet, when you just love things with your whole heart and all of your raging hormones because you're growing up, you're forming who you're going to be for the next few decades. And that's what's so beautiful about these coming of age stories and what they've meant to different teenagers around the world.
Thank you. So let's now move to some of the themes that come out of your, of the book. So, Jordan, let's start with you, Erhu. So there is, I just liked how you balanced Nabori's character and her sister's character, and trying to showcase. So, was it an issue of one that is young adults who is your target audience, and try to bring the diversity of characters, because Nabori she's very sure of what she wants, but also at the same time her sister is also very sure of what she wants, which you also seem to, we can say, okay, why do you want to get married and have kids? And that was like, that's me. So was that intentional to say you don't need to, the pressure, sister pressure, or peer pressure?
Yeah. For both sisters, they are pretty sure of what they want, yes. So one cannot cancel the other one. But in my other characters, you can see from the first chapter, I don't want to give spoilers, but there's a character, a friend of Nabari's, and she was about to get married, or she's about to get married. And she was very wishy-washy, like, oh, should I run away? Should I do this? Should I do that? And then in the end, she's like, oh, well, the spirits have got me, and I'm going to be one of the good women of the village and all that. So, yeah, I tried to make the characters, the female characters, as diverse as possible in their wants and their desires. And throughout Nabara's journey, she got to learn that everybody has their own, everybody has their own part, and because her part is she feels it's noble and it's not being pressured onto her. Yeah, it's better than theirs. It's not better than theirs. She has her own part to lead, and other people have their own part to lead. So, yeah.
So, but also at the end of the book, you, when Nabori comes back home from her adventures and assignment, there's a part that I want you to read at the end, but you also showcase her aunt in a different light, and she starts to let her know that that's what she wished for herself, but she has always acted traditional. So, what are you trying to do there?
Love over tradition. When you love your child so much that you just have to see them for who they are and let them be, let them grow, and let them lead the life they want to lead.
So for you, Jordan, I want to talk about, I think, what was very clear, one of the themes, child labor, and that just showcases that disability is not necessarily inability. And you subtly also, introduce queerness through Dele in the book, but in a very subtle, I think, manner. And I know the end of the book, you give the stats around, child labor in the U.S. and all that. Are there things that you genuinely care about? Because, there's quite an expansive part at the end around that.
So there is a very specific stimulus from me changing from writing about empires and kings and queens to domestic servants. The pandemic happened, and all of a sudden the eyes of the world, in the US at least, was on what we called essential workers. And yes, that was the nurses and doctors, but it was also the grocery store workers, the sanitation workers, everybody who was so essential to a society that even when there was a deadly pandemic happening, they still had to go out. And we pay them the least. And that just kind of blew my mind. It's something I kind of knew in theory, but the pandemic just put it at the forefront. And since then, there have been all of these beautiful labor movements across the world, but especially in the US where I am. Multiple strikes, and unions being formed. And I realized that in fantasy specifically, we usually talk about powerful people, when in fact, all of these kingdoms and fantasies and empires couldn't run without workers. And I had never read a fantasy about a worker. So I decided I'm going to write a high fantasy romance about a disabled teen domestic worker in a fantasy world. And it was, I do have physical disabilities, but the one that I put in this one is one I don't have. She has, her foot was damaged as a child worker. She was injured, and so she walks with a cane. And the statistic I put in the back of the book in the author's note, I think would blow a lot of American minds. A lot of Americans don't know that child labor is legal in the United States. They don't know that workers as young as 12 and 13 have been injured in American meatpacking companies, right? And I do like challenging, especially my Western audience about, because this is a story set in, a West African coded, beautiful fantasy city. But I'm talking about an issue that exists in every culture at this point because of capitalism, because it's easier to pay undocumented child workers nothing and get away with things because they can't report their injuries to the authorities because then they get deported, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was important to me, and I decided to explore that issue in a world I'd already created instead of in the country where I currently live.
Great. I think I like that part. So language. So Erhu, there's a specific reason why I asked you to read, where you also chose to read, which is great, because your book is the names, the title eventually come from, I think in your language is Iso wa Natunya. I'm so sorry, but in Setswana this is so this is Victoria Falls. This is Musua Tunya essentially. So was there that inspiration, or in your culture that you are trying to also is that? So also look at the names. There is Tumelo there. In Setswana, Tumelo is a belief or faith. What is it in your? It's just not.
That was a made-up name, actually.
Oh, okay. It's not made up now, I'm telling you. So I was fascinated by that. Was the inspiration from, Musua, like the real Musua Tunya, or that also exists in your culture or in your physical environment?
It's was inspired by Victoria Falls, Smuggler-Tonders, actually. Because I actually had Moyo, his background, he's from a very far away place.
Yes. So I also say Chipo, Moyo, those are very Zimbabwean names, familiar.
Some are made up.
Yeah.
Some are made up. But the one that is not made up is Moyo, where he's from, which is where I got the inspiration for the name. It just sounds so the smoke that thunders, because she's a very thunderous girl. So yeah, it just fits. And also, when I was researching and trying to, there's a scene actually that we're supposed to go over a waterfall, but we had to cut that scene. So that's where I was researching waterfalls in Africa, and I saw it and I was blown away. Beautiful waterfall, beautiful inspiration for Moyo's background also. Yeah, that's it.
So I think it's still to you. Did you have to, when you were thinking about language and the simplicity of it, looking at your audience, what was your thinking? Do you have to think from your culture, roots, folklore perspective, and then go into English, or the other way, or it was easier for you to just bring that story to life from an English perspective?
Yeah, it's easier to come from an English perspective and then fill it up with where I come from. Like with those food ingredients I mentioned, those are very specific to Urhobo, like the pronunciation and everything. And yeah, so I have to come from an English because it was going. I wanted the story to be easily digested by everyone. Yeah, so that's why I came from that point.
And then you, in terms of language and thinking about this West African, influence, but I guess because when I was asking this question I thought that you were born here and had spent time here, so English then comes naturally to you. That's fine. We can move ahead because I'm looking at the time now. And then, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the author's notes. I just want to check if what I thought that you're doing with the author's notes is what I was thinking. So you talk about femicide in the US. You talk about the child labor that you just talked about. What did you want to, trigger from your readers, especially given that it's a young adult as the core target? I mean, you always have spillover of adults, but what are you trying to achieve with that whole author's note with statistics and numbers?
So the happy ending of this book is very intentional. I think in a lot of, I'm going to get to the author's note this roundabout way. In most fantasies about someone who is a maid, the happy ending would be them leaving the working class. They marry a prince. They turn out to have magical powers that lets them rule everybody or join a different dimension. The happy ending for this Maid is an employee-owned workplace. And that's on purpose, because I wanted to give dignity to this work, that the work of a maid is necessary, and the only thing that's wrong with it is the stigma we put on it and the pay and the terrible conditions, right? Everyone agrees that rooms need to be clean, you know? So we all agree that it has to be done. We all agree that it's necessary. We just think that the job should hurt for some reason and have shame. And that is a sentiment that's so ingrained in society, especially where I live. And it especially applies to girls and women. So you see a lot of issues in this book that do affect, you know, what you'd call essential workers, but I do concentrate specifically on the way girls and women are exploited. That's very important to me. You see all of these different kinds of girls and women and how they respond to the situations into which they were born, including things like domestic labor, like reproductive coercion. You see how these women deal with work and motherhood and daughterhood. And sometimes it will frustrate you the way they deal with it. Because in a young adult fantasy, you want everybody to automatically know the system is bad and fight it. But I don't think that's real. I think a lot of us are complicit in the systems that oppress us because it's hard. And so we make plans to survive rather than to fight. And I think that's real, you know? And I don't see that represented in fantasy. She does grow and decide to fight, but I wanted to give honor to how hard it is just to survive.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both of you. The screen says we need to take questions from the audience. So we'll take questions. There's a hand there. And two hands the side.
So, hey, Jordan. Big fan. Loved Ribera. Loved Redemptor a lot. Really enjoyed it. Thought Tarisai was an amazing main character. So the question I want to ask, as someone who hasn't yet read Maid and Crocodile but will, how connected is the story to the world of Oluwan? And how similar is the main character? Like I said, I love Tarisai a lot. So is the MC of this story similar to Tarisai? And does Tarisai appear in this book?
So are they similar? The answer is no. And I do still think you will enjoy her, but that's on purpose. I wanted to, like, the world of Raybear, as you read, set in Oluwan, it spans all of these different beautiful continents because it's about a wealthy character who has access to change these systems of power and go places. And there are systems of magic in Raybear that just don't come into play in The Maid and the Crocodile because the main character is poor. That's it. She'd love to take a magical lodestone that whisks her across the world, but that costs money, so she never does that, you know? And I really liked that. It's like when you create a world that big, and then you get to zero in on just like a tiny part of it, you can describe it in so much detail than you had time for in the last book. As for whether or not Tarisai, the main character of the Raybear series, appears, that's a spoiler, which of course means yes. But maybe not in the way that you think.
Hello, Erhu and Jordan. Big fan. And I should be done reading your books collectively maybe by the time Ake is done. My question goes to both of you, and it's basically on fantasy books. There always seems to be like a need even for them to be like part of a sprawling universe that you could do spin-offs and sequels and prequels. Individually, why do you think this is usually the case, especially with fantasy writing?
In my own opinion, though, what I think is, I think people want to spend more time in this world because they love it so much. Yeah.
I mean, from a publishing perspective, money, right? So my publisher was excited about the spinoff, mostly because they get excited about things that they already feel there's an audience for, there's a base for, it's easier to market. So that's in the past been the reason why these things happen, but things are changing in publishing and not for the better. They're still recovering from a paper shortage from the pandemic. Like, I had so much pressure to make this book shorter. And I was like, and no, hey, in their defense, they paid me more for this book than for the longer books. But they were like, we just need it short. Attention spans are short, paper shortage is down. It's a mess right now. I can only speak for the American publishing industry, but I think we're going to see a shift. I'm not sure if we're going to get sprawling tomes of new fantasies. I don't know, for the next few years, we'll see what happens, but right now they're pressuring short.
Hi. My question is on language, and that's because you touched on it. And at lunchtime, I think I got into a conversation in regards to language, and this question is for Erhu. I hope I haven't massacred your name. But we were talking about how, English can be such a reductive language, especially when you're trying to capture cultural elements. And you spoke about when you were writing it, you used English because it's simpler to communicate. And I was just wondering, what are some of the aspects of the book or the telling of the book that you had to sort of adjust how you would convey that information, because English is not able to really capture the essence of culture in the way that indigenous languages are able to?
Okay, my answer is very simple. I used proverbs. If you actually read the book, you will see that there's a lot of proverbs that I think many Nigerians will actually get. So that's where I came from, the use of proverbs.
Hi, thank you both very much. We've talked a little bit about we actually talked a lot about the research that went into this, and I'm actually interested in another aspect of the research, which is the research of your readership. If you're young adults and how young adulthood is changing, and Jordan, you were just mentioning it, attention span gets shorter. How do you adapt, maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, to a changing readership, possibly?
So for the Rayberry series, my main challenge was acknowledging that this book was widely going to be read by white children, brown children, and black children, and not wanting to other the protagonist. I didn't want to over-explain things because I didn't just want to make her a foreigner in her own story. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of things that that I had to figure out a way to explain clearly, because, you want to be kind to children. There's nothing wrong with a white child who doesn't know what, yarn braids are, or, what any of these, cultural things are. But you also don't want to continue this trend of, making black children, and especially West African children, feel like the other in their own story, right? That their stories are just performances for the West to learn about them, right? So that's always like a weird line to walk with your book when you want to make it accessible to a broad audience, but you want to rely on the intelligence of your readers to infer things. So, there are things that I purposely don't explain. There are others where I find subtle ways to explain it. And so I always have to keep that in mind with my readership. One of the hardest books I've ever written is actually a middle grade book coming out in 2026. It hasn't been announced yet, but it's called The Genie Game. And it was difficult because I'm writing for a younger audience that is now reading about 3 grades below reading level because of the pandemic. I have talked to so many educators about this. They're begging. They're like, the kids can't even read Harry Potter anymore. Literacy levels are very, very low. We have not recovered yet. And so my natural writing voice, I had to go back and make it simpler and more accessible. And this story is also set in like a magical Los Angeles, so it's also just like the language has to be modern instead of this heightened fantasy language. And it was difficult. It was harder. It was harder to write that than these, poetic fantasy tomes. So it is a challenge, but I don't know, it feels like an exercise, a muscle you're exercising. There were lines in the Genie game I'd written, and then I'd backspace, I'd be like, no, that's Raybearer voice. That's not what this is. I have to try it again. It's difficult, but it's, necessary.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? So if the insights that you are having from publishers or from the audiences is that what concentration span is low, kids are still under reading, below their ages. But this book is about 300 and something pages. So how did you have to balance that? Because I think for the older young adults, they'll be able to, or do you have a specific age range for the young adults that you intended to go over like an almost 350 plus pages book if the concentration span is this short?
So for Maid and the Crocodile, it is actually very fast-paced. I've gotten feedback from readers saying, like, I wanted more. I wanted it to be as long as Raybearer. It's not that much shorter than Raybearer. I just wrote it differently. I wrote it so that the plot is driven more. We don't linger in a lot of places, and so you do things like that. The YA books I haven't really dumbed down just because I know that the readership is really broad. They tend to market to a lot of women in their 30s these days for YA, which I actually disagree with because I think that teenagers need books that center them in their fantasies and not, the fantasies of 30-year-old women with credit cards who want to watch hot fantasy guys make out, right? I just think teenagers deserve something that's just for them. We women in our 30s can have our own stuff, but leave YA for teenagers. They need something. So yeah, that's my little soapbox, but that's why I don't dumb down the language, because it's got a broad reader base.
Hi, first of all, I need to put a disclaimer out that I have stage fright. It's taking me a lot to speak up. Okay. Thank you. So my question is for Erhu. So a lot of people are just getting to know about you and your work, and you have really spoken about the research and what it took for you to write it, but I don't think you've really touched on what your story is about. We know other audience here, we have newer generations and other people that read, but I feel like some people might just be introduced to speculative fiction and the likes. So, okay. So I would just like to, what would you say, how would you, sell your book or, get people to, introduce your book to them? What do we need to know? What is that thing about your story that is amazing and why people should read it? Because I really believe that people should explore this story, especially because you are a Nigerian author that is in speculative fiction and you're being recognized world. She lives in Nigeria. She's not in the abroad or diaspora. So, really, speak about your book for us, please. Thank you.
Do you want the short or the long version? Long version. It's actually, what she said, it's actually not easy writing from Nigeria, living in Nigeria. I always thought that to get where I am today, to have this book published, I have to go to the abroad, A lot of writers feel that way. But I said to myself that I'm actually going to be in this Nigeria and I'm going to get an agent and I'm going to get published. And I worked really hard toward that. I didn't accept the rejections. I kept going, writing, especially the writing part, kept writing. At one point, I actually wanted to give up until I got an email, a rejection letter actually from an agent. She was like, she can't represent me because she wouldn't know what to do with it, with the story. But she urged me not to give up. to keep writing. And I was actually crying that day. I was like, yeah, I just have to continue. And I did. I think it was a year later that I got my agent, Sashira Detina. That was in October 2020. Yeah, so with this story, I actually want to encourage Nigerian writers, those who are still writing, thinking that your books and your stories are not going to be published. Just don't give up. I'm telling you, don't you dare give up. When you give up, then it's actually over. That's it. It's over. So don't give up. Keep writing. I'll keep writing. This book it's just, I don't know, it's a blessing, actually. It's a real blessing because it's come with so many things. It actually brought me to Ake. This is my first time here. And I told myself that I was going to come this year to Ake. I'm going to pay for myself. I'm going to do everything. But then I got the email that your book is giving you a ticket to Ake. So yeah, just the story, the story is a way to how will I say? It's a way to ginger myself. This story is a way to ginger myself and to let me know that I can do what I set my mind to, especially coming from a place where you are not giving, should I say handouts? You're not giving handouts, yeah. Because I of course, being published here, my publisher is in New York. I missed a lot of things, going on book tours and things like that. But I'm really proud of this book. It contains a lot of things from where I come from of course, the Yoruba mythology, which you don't see a lot of. You don't. Yoruba is very. If I ever ask a lot of people, like, do you know where the Yoruba tribe is? You know, a lot of people don't know. They know Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. So I'm really proud of this book, and I'm proud of myself for not giving up. That's also why I decided to run a mentorship program for unpublished writers living in Nigeria who write for young children. So yeah, that is this book for you. This book is my everything. So please buy it. Thank you.
Can you just summarize the story in about 2 minutes? Just tell us about it, sell it to us, because we want to buy it, but we want to taste it first. We want to taste it from
the book is it's about a girl called Nabari, and she's been pressured to get married, but she doesn't want that. She doesn't want to get married and be thrust into a life where she has to take care of a man and take care of babies. And she decided that she's going to leave and take her sister with her, but her sister has other plans. She's quite the opposite of Nabari, and Nabari has to come to terms with that. At the same time, it's almost like there's two plots going on in this story. At the same time, she comes into this creature in the forest who chooses her of sort. And then she gets to find out that this creature is
That's a great question. It's something I'm still figuring out. One thing I say is that I write when I'm not afraid. which is to say that I'm afraid a lot of the time. And that can get in the way of writing because you're thinking of all the eyes that are going to be on it. And if you've wrapped your identity up in being a writer, then when you can't write, it feels like you're failing at being yourself. So I think the one thing you can do to fight writer's block is to tell yourself it's not that serious. Even if it is, lie to yourself. Say, I don't have to write this. This is just a book. It's a book. It's a fantasy. It's a story. Who cares? It's not brain surgery. If I don't finish this story, nobody will die. Like whatever you have to do to get the words on the page and get over your own fear. So that's often the first cause of writer block is fear. The second cause is that you need to fix something earlier in the story. You don't know what happens next because you haven't actually set it up earlier in the story. That's almost always the problem. So that's the technical thing that can help writer's block.
Okay, I don't want to sound proud, but I've never had writer's block. Because I'm a planner, I'm a plotter. Before I start writing, I must know everything. The only way to actually beat writer's block is to plan your book, plot it out, outline it line by line, and just, if I'd finished the book, it will look like you've already written it. So when you get into it, it's so much easier. Just have to fill in the spaces.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Our time is up. Unfortunately, I think they are here and available. I think outside you can have conversations. And as usual, let's please go out and buy the book. I really enjoyed both of them, and all the best.
Thank you.
I want to say real quick. I brought 2 sets of my book to actually give away because I know that they're hard. Sure. Anyone I only have 2 sets, but I saw you guys first, so you can have them. Yeah.